Let me ask you something before we even get started. If you have a pension waiting for you and Social Security on top of that, which one should you turn on first, and at what age? Most people I talk to assume the answer is simple. Just take whatever's available as soon as you can and start enjoying retirement. But here's what nobody tells you. The order and the timing of those two decisions, made together, can be worth more to your household than almost any investment choice you'll ever make. And the part that should really get your attention? Once you sign certain pieces of paper, there are no do-overs. None. So today I want to walk you through exactly what happens when these two income sources collide, because that's really what they do. They collide, they overlap, they push against each other in ways that affect your taxes, your monthly income, and most importantly, the financial security of whichever spouse lives longer. I've sat across the table from a lot of couples who did everything right during their working years. They saved, they were disciplined. And then they made one uncoordinated claiming decision that quietly cost them tens of thousands of dollars they'll never get back. Not because they were careless, but because nobody ever showed them how the pieces fit together. Here's the encouraging news. You don't need a finance degree to get this right. You don't need expensive software. What you need is to understand a handful of relationships, how one choice changes the value of another, and then make your decisions on purpose instead of by default. That's the whole game. Decisions on purpose. And I'll tell you, when folks actually do this the right way, the payoff goes way beyond just collecting what they earned. We're talking about more total income over your lifetime, real protection for the spouse who's left behind, and a tax situation that doesn't ambush you every April for the next 2 or 3 decades. That's what's on the table. So over the next several minutes, I'm going to break down 3 things. First, a major law that just rewrote the rules for millions of public workers, and you need to know whether it touched your benefit. Second, exactly how a pension and Social Security interact, both on your tax return and in your monthly cash flow. And third, the specific moves you should be weighing before you lock in either decision. Let's get into it. Now, before we go further, if at any point you realize you want a real plan built around your own numbers, there's a link below where you can watch a free training. I'll show you the same framework my team uses to help people put all of this together. But for now, let's keep going, because the first thing I want to cover changed the math for a huge group of retirees, and a lot of them still don't know it. I'm talking about the Social Security Fairness Act. It was signed into law in early 2025, and honestly, it's the biggest shift in Social Security policy that most of us have seen in a generation. What it did was wipe out 2 old rules that had been quietly shrinking benefits for certain workers for decades. The first was something called the windfall elimination provision. The second was the government pension offset. If you've never heard those names, that's fine, but if you or your spouse spent a career in public service, they may have been costing you money without you fully realizing it. Here's the background. For years, if you earned a pension from a job that didn't pay into Social Security, and there are a lot of those jobs, your Social Security benefit could be slashed because of it. Who are we talking about? Teachers, firefighters, police officers, certain federal workers under the older civil service system, plenty of state and local government employees. These are people who served their communities for 30 years and then discovered their Social Security check was a fraction of what they expected, simply because of how their pension was classified. The repeal changed that, and it was made retroactive to benefits payable starting in early 2024. So throughout 2025, the Social Security Administration was busy sending out lump sum back payments and bumping up monthly checks for the people affected. If you or your spouse fall into this category, and you haven't actually logged in and confirmed your current benefit amount, that is step 1. Stop the video, write it down, do it this week. I've watched person after person discover their number went up, and they had no idea. This wasn't a small tweak either. It reshaped the planning picture for roughly 2.5 to 3 million public sector workers and their spouses. And that second part, the spouses, is where it gets really important. The old government pension offset rule used to reduce a spouse's or a survivor's Social Security by 2/3 of the non-covered pension amount. In a lot of cases, it zeroed those benefits out completely. So a teacher's husband or a firefighter's wife might have spent years believing they'd receive nothing in survivor benefits. Here's the thing, that belief is now outdated. With that offset gone, public workers and their spouses can collect their full pension right alongside their full, unreduced spousal or survivor Social Security. That single change opens up planning doors that were welded shut before, especially around when the higher earning spouse should claim. So if you and your spouse ever assumed your Social Security would be gutted because of a public pension, you owe it to yourselves to revisit that assumption. The numbers are different now, genuinely different. Okay, that covers the public pension situation specifically, but I don't want you to think coordination only matters if you were a teacher or a firefighter. Far from it. Even if your pension came from a private company that paid into Social Security the whole time, these two income streams still interact in ways that catch people off guard. So let me show you the first place they collide, and that's on your tax return. This is something almost nobody sees coming until they file that very first tax return in retirement, and then they're staring at the number wondering what happened. Let me explain it simply. Your pension income gets taxed as ordinary income, same as a paycheck, at your regular federal rate. How your state treats it depends on where you live. That part most people grasp. Social Security is where it gets sneaky. Your Social Security benefits can become partially taxable, and up to 85% of them can be pulled into your taxable income once your combined income climbs above certain levels. For a married couple filing jointly, that top tier kicks in at a surprisingly low threshold. And here's the kicker that almost nobody knows. Those thresholds were written into law decades ago and were never adjusted for inflation. Not once. So every year, as the cost of everything else rises, more and more ordinary retirees get caught in a net that was originally meant for the wealthy. What does that mean in plain terms? If you've got a meaningful pension coming in, you're almost guaranteed to have the maximum portion of your Social Security exposed to tax. And most folks simply don't factor that in when they're sketching out their retirement income on a napkin. They count the gross numbers, feel good about them, and then get blindsided. Then there's what I call stacking. Picture it like layers. You've got your pension on the bottom, you stack Social Security on top of that. Then you add any withdrawals from your IRA or 401k on top of that. Each layer pushes your total income higher, and suddenly you can land in a higher tax bracket than you ever hit during your working years. Let that sink in. Some retirees pay a higher marginal rate retired than they did employed. They expected taxes to go down, they went up. And it doesn't stop at income tax. This same stacked income affects your Medicare premiums through something called IRMA, the income-related surcharge on Medicare Part B and Part D. Cross certain income lines and your premiums jump, sometimes by a lot. So imagine a household with a solid pension, a healthy combined Social Security benefit, and even a modest withdrawal from savings. That household can get hit on three fronts at once: higher brackets, a bigger share of Social Security taxed, and a Medicare surcharge nobody warned them about. Now here's why I'm telling you all this. When you see this collision coming early before you claim you have room to do something about it, you can adjust when you claim. You can restructure how and when you pull from your accounts. You can smooth your taxable income across the years instead of letting it spike. We're going to come back to exactly how in a few minutes, so hold that thought. Because taxes are just one half of the picture. The other half is how the timing of these two decisions physically pulls on each other. And this is the part I really want you to understand, because pension and Social Security claiming are not two separate choices you make in two separate rooms. They're connected tightly. Let's start with your pension itself, because the option you pick there directly shapes what your smartest Social Security move should be. Most pensions hand you a menu. There's usually a single life option, which pays the most each month, but it pays only while you're alive, and then it stops cold at your death. There's usually a joint and survivor option, which pays you somewhat less each month, but it keeps flowing to your spouse after you're gone. And some pensions offer a lump sum, where you take the whole value up front and manage it yourself. Every one of those comes with a trade-off, and there's no universally right answer. The single life choice maximizes your monthly check, but it leaves your spouse with nothing from that pension if you pass first. The joint and survivor choice trades some monthly income for the peace of mind that both of you are covered for life. The lump sum hands you full control and flexibility, but it also hands you all the investment risk and all the longevity risk. If you live to 95, that money has to last. The right pick depends on your spouse's health and life expectancy, the other assets you've built, your other guaranteed income, and honestly, how comfortable you'd feel managing a large sum on your own. And here's the weight of it. In most cases, once you sign that election, it's permanent. There's no rewind button. Now watch how this connects to Social Security. Say you choose the single life pension because you want the biggest possible check today. Totally understandable. But by doing that, you've just made your Social Security claiming age far more important than it would otherwise be. Why? Because if you delay your Social Security and every year you wait between your full retirement age and 70, your benefit grows by roughly 8%. That larger benefit becomes the survivor benefit your spouse inherits if you're the higher earner. So when the pension won't continue to your spouse, that delayed Social Security becomes the lifeline that does. So for a couple making these calls together, there's a genuine opportunity here. Structure it so you capture the most lifetime income while still shielding the survivor. But here's the trap I see again and again, and it breaks my heart a little every time. Someone takes the single life pension for the biggest monthly check and then turns around and claims Social Security at 62 to start the money flowing right away. On the surface, it feels like maximizing. In reality, it's a double hit to the surviving spouse. The pension dies with the first spouse, and the Social Security that survives is permanently shrunken. Both decisions working against the very person who needs protection most. If you could see this laid out on an income map, and we do this with every couple we work with, you'd see a stable line of income while both spouses are living, and then a cliff at the first death. The pension drops off, the smaller Social Security drops off, and suddenly the survivor is leaning hard on the portfolio just to stay afloat. Anything you can do now to soften that cliff pays off enormously down the road. And speaking of doing it now, if you want to see how we actually help people build a retirement plan they can believe in, not just a pile of guesses, there's a link below for that free training. I'll walk you through the exact framework. Now let me keep going, because the next part is where the dollars are biggest. I want to walk you through the survivor math, because this is where the stakes peak and where I see the most painful, most avoidable mistakes. Here's the basic rule. When the first spouse passes, the survivor keeps the larger of the two Social Security benefits and loses the smaller one entirely. So household Social Security drops at the first death. That's just the mechanics. There's no getting around it. But here's the piece almost nobody understands. The survivor benefit equals what the deceased spouse was actually receiving at the time of death, not what they could have gotten if they'd waited. So whatever the higher earner was collecting the day they passed, that's the amount locked in for the survivor for the rest of their life. Follow this all the way through. If the higher earner claimed early at 62 and took a permanently reduced check, the survivor inherits that reduced check forever. We're frequently talking about hundreds of dollars a month, and when you multiply that across the years, a survivor typically lives often 5, 10, even 15 years beyond the first spouse. It swings the survivor's lifetime income down by tens of thousands of dollars. I don't say that to be grim. It's just the reality, and pretending otherwise doesn't protect anyone. Now layer the pension back in. If you elected the joint and survivor option, your spouse keeps receiving that pension income after you're gone. That's one solid layer of protection in place. But if you went with the single life option or took the lump sum, that protection has to come from somewhere else. And the two places it comes from are Social Security and your investment portfolio. That, right there, is exactly why the Social Security claiming age matters so much more when the pension doesn't carry over. In that scenario, Social Security becomes the only inflation-adjusted, guaranteed for life income the survivor has. Maximizing it isn't a nice-to-have. It's the foundation of that person's security. So this is why we run this math with every single couple. The decisions you make today literally write the financial story for whichever one of you lives longer. That's not a small thing. That's everything. All right. Survivor protection is one major piece. The other piece is how you pull money from your investment accounts and how that fits into the pension and Social Security puzzle. Let me show you a window of opportunity that most retirees with pensions walk right past and pay for over the next 20 years. The years before you turn on Social Security, and especially before required minimum distributions kick in your mid-70s, are the most flexible tax planning window you will ever have in retirement. It's a window, and it doesn't stay open forever. Here's why it's so valuable. If you delay Social Security, and you're living mostly on your pension in the meantime, your taxable income during those years might be the lowest it will ever be for the rest of your life. And low taxable income creates room to pull money strategically from your IRA or 401k while you're in a low bracket, and room to do Roth conversions, where you move pre-tax dollars into a Roth account at today's lower rates and never pay tax on that money again. Once Social Security switches on and those required distributions begin, your taxable income climbs and that flexibility evaporates. I've watched retirees with good pensions completely ignore this window and then spend the next 2 decades paying more tax than they had to simply because they didn't act during the years their income was lowest. The window was open. They didn't step through it. Now, once you're fully retired with all your income sources flowing, the question shifts from tax positioning to sustainability. How do you draw income across what could easily be 25 or 30 years without running dry? There are a few approaches we use, depending on the person. One is the simple inflation-adjusted method. Set a starting withdrawal and bump it up with inflation each year. It's easy, but it's rigid. It doesn't react to what your portfolio actually does. Another recognizes that spending in retirement isn't flat. It tends to be higher early on when you're active, dip through the middle years, and rise again later for healthcare. Building your plan around that real-life pattern can support more enjoyment early without adding long-term risk. And then there's an approach built around guardrails, which I find especially powerful for people who'd rather have ongoing guidance than a set-it-and-forget-it number. You establish an upper and a lower boundary based on how your plan is actually tracking. When the markets cooperate and you're running ahead, You hit the upper guardrail and you can comfortably spend more without guilt. When things tighten and the risk rises, you hit the lower guardrail and you make a modest, usually temporary adjustment to keep the plan on course. No drastic lifestyle upheaval. Just small course corrections. The result tends to be a retirement with more confidence, a better lifestyle along the way, and a lower chance of outliving your money. There's a link below if you'd like to dig deeper into that withdrawal philosophy. So now you've seen how all the pieces interact. The law, the taxes, the pension elections, the survivor math, the withdrawal window. Let me bring it together into something you can actually use. How do you coordinate all of this for your own situation? It starts with running real numbers on multiple scenarios side by side. Take your different pension election options and pair them with different Social Security claiming ages for each spouse. Then compare the lifetime income across realistic longevity scenarios, and don't just look at the grand total. Look at where the income shows up. How much arrives while both of you are alive versus how much is there for the survivor flying solo? Those are very different questions, and the total dollar figure alone can hide a dangerous shortfall on the back end. Then bring taxes into it. How does each combination affect which brackets you sit in across the decades, and what does that do to your after-tax income, the income you actually get to spend? After that, stress test the whole thing. What happens if one spouse passes early? What if the market drops right after you retire? What if healthcare costs spike or your spending needs shift? A plan that only works in perfect conditions isn't a plan. What separates the households who nail this from the ones who drift into a worse outcome usually comes down to 3 habits. They treat these as coordinated decisions made together, not separate choices made years apart. They look at the actual math for their actual situation, instead of leaning on one-size-fits-all rules of thumb that may not fit their mix of income at all. And they respect the permanence of these choices, the pension election especially, and the higher earners claiming age right alongside it. Those deserve careful thought before you're standing at the HR desk or clicking submit on the Social Security website. Get this right, and the reward is real. More lifetime income, stronger protection for the one who's left behind, and a tax picture that holds up across your whole retirement. That's what coordinated planning is supposed to deliver. Because at the end of the day, this was never really about pensions versus Social Security in isolation. It's about making sure every moving piece works together so you get the most out of the retirement you spent 30 or 40 years building. You earned this. Let's make sure it's protected. If you'd like to see how my team and I help people walk through these exact decisions as part of a complete plan covering income, taxes, investments, healthcare, and all the pieces that move the needle, the link is below. Watch the free training when you get a chance. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.